This is the Troutbitten Podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout. This is Troutbitten. This is the Troutbitten Podcast, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swantowski, and I'm the owner of Troutbitten and the author of troutbitten.com. So before we get going, I want to quickly thank everyone who recently left a comment and a solid rating for the Troutbitten Podcast on Apple or Spotify. Seems like every time I bring that up, we get a lot of extra ratings coming in, and so thanks to everyone. That helps a lot. All right, tonight's episode is about wind and how to deal with it as fly anglers. Wind, and how not just to deal with it, but to sometimes use it to your advantage. So I like to say that there's always some element that you're battling out there. Sometimes there's more than one, right? And we did a full podcast on those elements in season 1 called Dealing with Weather and Fighting the Elements. In that episode, we touched on the sun, low water, high water, heat, cold, rain, snow, ice, and that's right, wind. All of these elements present challenges to overcome. And Bill tried telling us that heat was the toughest. But Trevor stood up for wind, and I think that many of us agreed that wind was pretty tough. Wind challenges our cast, and it challenges our drifts the most of all these elements. It forces us to adapt our presentations the most, and it makes some of our favorite styles actually impossible to fish that day. But there is always a way to beat it, or to at least deal with it, and sometimes do more than even make the most of it. There's always a way to make things work. And really, no matter how rough the wind gets, there are strategies, not just for fighting through it, but for fishing well and catching trout. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. It's going to be a good one. I have the Troutbitten guys here with me tonight, and here they are. Good to have you back, Matt Grobe, back on the mic. How you doing, bud?
Thank you. Yeah, feels good to be back. Had a little trip back to my old stomping grounds, and it was good, man. It was good catching up with you at the Steeler game, and it was good catching up with Bill for our annual pizza and beer. And Bill even brought me Broken Heels
Nice.
that Dom that you couldn't produce for the tailgate. But
So sorry. Calling me out.
Yeah, no, it was
It's because I drank it all on the way there, bud.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it was good. It's good, and I'm settling back into Montana. Deep winter. Got out fishing once since I've been back, and that first, high teens day makes you pucker up and realize, man, I should have wore that extra layer of socks, right? No matter how many times I winter fish, it's like the first day I'm just some part of me's unprepared.
I always say, like, something's going to hurt on a winter day. If you are, I don't know, sub 20, let's say, something's going to hurt.
It sure is.
Yeah.
Dress all you want, something's going to hurt. It's the toes, it's the fingers. I know what you're saying, too. It's like, I don't know, Trevor, does the body get used to things like that? I mean, the first day, I'm like, my fingers. Yeah, fingerless wool gloves. And my fingertips are out, just like my face is. But my fingers are complaining about it, and maybe my face isn't.
Yeah. I mean, the body definitely accommodates to temperature changes, and they're, people that live in colder climates, or you can even acclimate yourself, keeping your house cold or taking cold showers.
I'm not doing that.
That's a good idea.
No, it's not.
We should have the Troutbitten ice bath competition.
It's not a good idea.
I got dibs on that.
No.
I bet you I can win that one.
On the ice challenge, Bill?
Yeah. Oh,
why?
Man, dude.
You do that?
No, I guess I'm more accustomed to the cold. But I have taken an ice bath before.
Oh,
They're tough.
An ice bath. Yeah.
They're tough.
Taking one of those.
You know what I think part of it is too is it's shocking to me that I move so much less because the fish are in winter holes that I'm actually pounding a slower deep hole. So I don't have as much movement, right? I'm not working out as much as I'm usually doing. And I think that catches up to me. Like when you're sitting in that deep water up to your chest for 30 minutes, it's like, and it's like, oh my gosh, you like wiggle your feet and it hits you, right? It's crazy.
That makes a lot of sense.
Again, no matter how prepared you are, that happens. And that's why I work in streamers a lot of times, because then I say, all right, I got to move. I got to move.
Yeah.
Smart. Or just take a walk. Yeah, absolutely. Doesn't matter how you dress, something's going to hurt.
Yeah.
All right, here's Bill Dell. Well, you already said a couple things, Bill. People know what you sound like.
Yeah.
You need a new hat. You've put some wear on that one.
No,
It's looking well loved.
Oh no, I like
love
this. It finally broke in.
See, I'm like you. I want an old hat.
Yeah,
Bill's
I
got
don't
a-
like it looking.
Bill's got at least a year old, more than that, probably. Troutbitten hat
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, the key is to throw it in the washer and run it through the washer and a dryer at least twice, and then it's you kind of start wearing it broken in.
I like it.
Hmm.
There's Matt's too. Matt has a little bit newer one.
Yeah, and I like to keep it clean.
I know you do. Hey, here's Trevor Smith. Please say hello, Dr. Smith.
Hey, how we doing?
Good. I had a
Good.
question come in asking why we call you Dr. Wool. And so it
Oh,
was
boy.
obvious that listener hadn't heard you and listened to
Yeah,
you
you
in
got to
season
catch
1.
up, man. Listen to the
Gotta
listen
catch
to the backlogs.
It was love affair with wool.
That's right. Why do we call you Dr. Wool?
Well, I love wool,
Mhm.
and I love merino wool in particular. I love all of the benefits as a fabric wool has to offer, and I just love that it's a natural fabric and it's got so many cool techie properties to it that are kind of built into the fiber itself. So
Right on.
I love wearing wool, and now it's sort of become a joke. And I'm a family
Yes.
physician. I work as a doctor in my day job, so
Mhm.
hence the Dr. Wool.
Dr. Wool. And you taught us all about wool in 2 podcasts.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
took 2 podcasts to,
There was a monologue in
'cause
there
I surprised
somewhere.
Yeah, there was.
right? I
Yeah.
surprised him in one episode. I'm like, so tell us all about wool. He's like, well, I this
Yeah.
and that, and I think this and that. And then you
Right.
texted me and you're like, I want to do better.
Yeah.
Let's talk about wool more next podcast.
Came
Yeah.
back
You're a
with
stickler for the
research.
details.
I didn't feel like I did it justice.
Well,
Wool
hey,
deserved better.
you and I had a beer the other night, and I brought these 2 things up. I'm going to bring them up right here.
Yeah.
I bought my first wool base layer. And seriously, I love it. Fantastic. Super, super warm. And now these are the 2 things I said, though. You didn't tell me about this. That, okay, wool stays warm when wet. Everybody, you told me that. Everybody knows. It's warm when wet. What did I say? What I learned is it also stays wet when it's wet. It stays it doesn't want to dry quickly. It stays soggy.
Yes.
You didn't tell me that. So the cuffs,
This
the cuff, by my wrist, sometimes that'll get wet because I'm a fisherman, right? And then that's
Yeah.
wet all day long. But if it was, I don't know, poly, some kind of poly
Right.
blend or whatever, that would dry pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think
It's a rough life.
a stab at why that could occur is just that the fibers of wool, like we talked about the hygroscopic quality of wool, where like, the fiber itself
Yeah, we
absorbs
did.
water.
We did.
Yeah, we were
Right.
talking. Bill and I were. Yeah,
Yeah. Bill added a lot on that one.
I grew.
But it was that water gathers between the fibers, but also within the fibers. And so the carrying capacity of water is higher for a wool garment. So if you do soak it, it is not ideal. That is true. So be warned.
Yeah, it was
Be
raining
warned.
today, and
Yeah.
water event 8-hour day. It was raining
Right.
pretty hard at times, and so water was down on those cuffs again. I'm like, stays wet.
Yeah.
Trevor,
When,
how's that
wet.
Vormy piece? Is that shed
Awesome.
better?
It sheds much better. Vormy is a wool based company out of Colorado that Groe turned me on to, and they do a heat treatment to the outside of their wool that kind of hardens or semi-hardens the fabric and the kind of fibers on the outside of the cloth, and creates almost like a water resistant and almost like a DWR
No
finish, just using a heat coating. It's not sprayed with anything.
That
So
is different.
it's kind of it's a cool, and they have a really tight weave on that external fabric too. So it's a really neat, more waterproof, I would say, certainly water resistant wool. But I think, wool as a fabric deals best with vapors, so sweat, works really well with, and it also works really well with high humidity, low, that kind of a situation, like a humid day, cold, humid day, it can use that humidity to create heat. And so I think an ideal place for wool in a fisherman's, ensemble is base layers. And I do think Vormy has found a way to make it even an ideal outerwear. But I think for most folks that are going to use merino wool, the base layer and even mid layers are great for it. But if you're going to reach down into the water and pull your fly off a rock, you want to push that sleeve up high.
I learned that.
And if that's too much for people to handle, then
Go to hell, right?
You know.
Grow pair.
Yeah.
No.
And I think you were real whiny that night. You were also complaining about the smell of the wool.
Oh yeah,
weren't
there's
you?
a scent. Yeah, you smell like
yeah.
a bit of a wet sheep. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think
There's a
and
scent
I think you mentioned,
wet wool.
yeah, you had a client that had kind of hit the answer a bit on that the lanolin can have a smell. But I think what people will notice is certain garments of theirs may smell more than others, depending on how much lanolin's left in it.
Seems like the highest quality wool actually stinks the most. And
Yeah.
I will say, in fairness, stink I think is almost too big of a word for it. It doesn't. It just has a scent. Plenty of
Yeah,
things
and
have
I
a
don't
scent.
even
It's
think
not
it's-
offensive, but there's a scent
No.
there.
I've heard it called like a wet dog smell, but
Kind
I don't
of.
think I don't actually even think it's that strong. I think it's just
Agreed.
like it is a particular smell. Yeah, no, it's
All
not
right, so that's
bad.
our third wool podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Is this the winter
Exactly.
podcast? I thought this was the
I love
wind
it.
podcast.
that's good.
We'll get
No,
there.
that's
We'll get there.
so that's why we call him Dr. Wool. There you go.
That's right.
He doctored it
That's
up.
right. All I do is talk about wool.
You are an authority on many subjects.
Many subjects.
Many.
Self-proclaimed authority.
What about wind?
Yeah.
You good with wind?
I'm great with wind.
You had a lot to say on the on that other podcast,
Yeah.
on that season 1 podcast where we talked about all the elements. You were the first proponent of wind being the most difficult. You convinced many of us, except for Bill. He's on heat being the most difficult.
I'm on heat because
Heat.
I'm the fat kid. You know, that's
No,
the hardest
you're
thing
not.
for me. That's the hardest thing for me to fish it.
I do agree it's super uncomfortable. And I think you were thinking about it in the sense that like if you took heat all the way to influencing even the fish and the water, and if the water was warm and all that, like that, and that makes sense to me. But I was imagining a scenario in which the water's still cold, you know, in our relatively temperature stable streams, and yet it's hot outside. I'd much rather fish in that than a super windy day.
Yep. So wind is it. I mean, wind is tough. Let's do it.
is it.
You guys ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
As fly anglers and tyers, we understand the value of having the right tool for the job. AvidMax.com offers over 20,000 products and the knowledge to help find the right tools for your job, whether that be at the tying bench or on the water. Listeners of the Troutbitten podcast receive a discount at AvidMax.com. Enter the code TROUT10, that's the number 10, at checkout to save 10% on your order. Orders over $25 ship for free, so you can put more gas in your tank or beer in your cooler. For all things fly fishing and tying, elevate your game with AvidMax. Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Troutbitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Troutbitten's favorite beer. So on windy days, I've had a few clients even ask me if we're still going to fish. we're going to fish in this? I'm like, yeah, we're all right. You know, and we're not talking about tornadoes here. Okay. But we're talking about wind. It's moving the trees back and forth. You're hearing the trees groan sometimes and creak. And yeah, if you didn't hold your hat down, sometimes that could fly away. You know what I mean? Some heavy wind here. That's what we're talking about tonight. And I've seen anglers, you guys too, you're out there and they'll just give up early and walk back to the car while I think most of us keep fishing. And just because there's some heavy gusts there that kind of get the best of those guys. And that's all right. And then the parking lots are often empty if there's just, major wind in the forecast. Now that often comes with rain too. But what comes with that is clouds. And we like that, right? I mean, so, because we've acknowledged that tough weather is something that trout seem to really like. And, clouds, great. So much better than sun. I'd rather have a windy day with clouds than a sunny day that's calm. Seriously.
Yeah.
I do better.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And I think most people do. And that's across the fishing spectrum, I think. Most people acknowledge that. And yet, those same people will often stay home because they think of them as bad conditions. And it's something they see as a negative. I don't want to be uncomfortable out there, or, oh, you can't even fly fish in that wind. But we kind of see this as an opportunity a lot of times to, first of all, have a lot of water to ourselves. And second, we're going to talk, through this podcast, and especially at the end, I want to highlight a couple things we can do because of the wind, which actually help you out sometimes. But let's start with this, guys. Do you think that the wind bothers the trout at all? Do you think it affects them or bothers them?
I think it bothers them. I can think of more situations where I think it creates better fishing. Like it's blowing things into the river for the fish to eat.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I've been on rivers that literally had white caps.
Yeah. From wind, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe at that point it affects them if there's a hatch. There's a white cap, and so it might be harder for them to feed on the bugs, at least on the surface.
Blows the bugs right off the surface, yeah.
That might be the only thing I could think is, if you have a good hatch and it is windy, the sailboats just blow straight off the water, and so fish don't get to kind of sit there and pluck them off the surface.
Good point.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Bill on that. I do think, in summer in particular, I think terrestrial season can be augmented by the wind when there are bugs in the trees and leaves and banks, grass, etc. I think that's probably seasonal, though. I don't think necessarily all times of the year does that necessarily hold true. The other thing that I think potentially would aid your fishing is that wind on the water creates disturbance, which reduces the clarity of the surface, and that could create a perception of safety for the trout, where you don't have aerial predators able to see down through the water column as easily. So
so instead of it bothering them, I think it can kind of make them feel more secure, like you're saying, just like rain on the water. We had some really low and clear conditions, and then throughout the fall, when we started getting some rain, I noticed that those trout, even though the water hadn't come up yet, the trout were just much more forgiving about your presence. They didn't see it coming from as far, just because of the surface disturbance of the rain. Yeah, surely if you have heavy wind that's rippling it up a little bit, those are ripples, and the trout like it. I don't think it bothers them. I don't think they care. I don't think they care if it's raining on top of them. I don't think they care if it's windy up in the air. They don't care. They're in the water.
They're already wet.
Yeah.
They're already wet.
What do you see, Groe?
Yeah, I think I agree with what everybody said. I think bother, if we're sticking to the point bother, I think the only situation where they would be bothered is, I firmly believe, like when the sulfurs are at their peak, or, blueing olives. I think there's a time where those fish are up and they're looking for those sailboats, right? Like that's a primary food source. So seasonality at certain times, I think they could be bothered that their bluing olives are blowing off the water, or their sulfur duns are blowing off the water. But that would be the only, time where I could see the fish being annoyed that their food isn't readily available. But, on the flip side, Trevor, like you said, other times the wind is aiding them. Grasshopper fishing out here is a prime example.
Good one.
That's a terrestrial, right? Like those fish, the wind, you talk about wind and out west. Like I live in the wind. I fish in the wind all the time. And
that's right.
Those fish know, though, like at 11 o'clock, the wind's going to pick up and it's going to blow hoppers to the bank. And those fish are like readily go to the bank because they know that. So there's a situation where they can benefit from the wind. I'd say more than not, it doesn't bother them.
Yeah. I think we're all agreeing, and maybe we're all missing something, but we're all agreeing that really the only way it affects them is with that dry fly fishing.
Yeah.
Hey, let's briefly, though, acknowledge the problem of wind in the first place. How does it affect the cast, and does it affect the drift? How does it hurt us in the first place? And then let's talk about how we each kind of like to overcome it with different styles. How's it mess you up?
For me personally, the biggest detriment to the wind is the presentation of the flies. And I'm speaking on, even if I'm dry dropper fishing or if I'm tightline nymphing, when you get a steady enough wind, it creates unnatural movement on the surface with your dry fly or on your tightline rig, right? It just pushes it unnaturally faster than the current sometimes when the wind's that bad. And the other big piece is you lose contact for me, right? You get that little bow in your sighter because the wind's blowing the bow and your flies are upstream, and it can be tough, right? You can try to put more weight on to fix that problem, and we'll talk about that. But that, for me, that's my biggest issue is the drift.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can think of many fish that I've missed with that little, I just lost a contact with that, like you're saying, that bow in the sighter, and yeah, it quickly becomes frustrating.
Yeah, and when I'm fishing dries and it's super windy, and if we're talking about the drift, I might need to mend, and I go to mend, and there goes the wind pushing me actually the wrong way. As soon as you unsuction that line from the surface, it gets pushed around, especially in heavy wind.
Yeah.
So the drift suffers, and it's the drift part. But the cast is extremely tough too sometimes. Whether you're on a dry fly or you're on a tight line rig or whatever, we're fishing. I mean, it's influencing the cast and the drift. It'll push your cast around. It'll push your drift around.
It depends on the directionality of the wind. If the wind is blowing downstream or upstream directly, one way or the other, it's going to cause inaccuracy in your casting as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Definitely hurts your accuracy in the cast.
Yeah.
Trevor?
Yeah, I think, and you're talking about cast accuracy, presentation. It's basically every aspect of fishing, I think.
Kind of, right?
That's what's so hard about it to me is like you can't not think about it, right? It's everything you're doing is going to be frustrated to some extent by that wind. And on our streams, in some of the narrow streams, or depending upon the bank and the wading situation, you can't always get into a position where you can make it favorable for you or work with it. So it just frustrates me a lot.
I don't care how good of a caster you are. You're getting tangled too, right? So you're not only are you dealing with casting issues and drift issues, but you're not fishing as often because you're getting tangled, right? I mean, I don't care how good you are, you're dealing with some bird's nests when it's super windy.
That's because it takes away that accuracy, and you're real good, without the wind. Then you just have to compensate for it, and we're about to talk about all that, but you can feel that wind coming from over your left shoulder, so you got to kind of punch that back over to your left a little bit because the wind's going to push it to the right. It's it's that compensation, and you eventually can work with it. But yeah, man, you're going to be tying a few extra knots because of the wind. You got to stay calm.
Yeah,
don't get mad. All right, so Bill brought up the wind direction. Let's jump in here. We talked about the problems, but then some solutions. And I'm going to say the first thing is I'm kind of always trying to recognize where that wind is coming from. I just brought up, it's coming over my left shoulder. One of the things I do, and I recognized this years ago, I like to kind of, on a windy day, I kind of want to have my ears out. I don't necessarily like wearing a stocking cap. I'll try to not have that on if I can get away with it. Now, of course, sometimes you just have to have your ears covered to stay warm. But I noticed, like somewhere on my body, I need to feel where the wind is coming from. And on these windiest days, honestly, today was one of them. Kind of ironically, we had a lot of wind today, and it was swirling. Front, behind, to the right. Hardly ever came from the left today. But I was very aware of it because it wasn't that cold. It was like 45, 50 degrees. And for a lot of the day, I had my hood down, and you just kind of, you're sensing where it's coming from. And when it's swirling, I want to know where that's coming. Oh, it switched. It's behind me now. Okay. I'm going to punch a back cast a lot more firm back there. That's important to me, is to recognize what direction it's coming from so I know how to deal with it. And I think as we go through these, we're going to talk about how you deal with it. Dry flies, I can work with it, work with it coming from a different angle with dries than I can with a nymph.
I like that. I think, Dom, it goes into, there's two different things I'll do when I'm dealing with the wind. And one is almost a game plan, tactical thought process, and then I transition into actual tactical fishing remedies to deal with it. So at first it's like, okay, there's a few things you can do, right? You can do what you're talking about, wind direction. That could potentially influence what side of the bank I choose to fish.
Absolutely.
The other piece to that with the wind is, everybody's river is different. You got bends, you got canyons, you got some sections that are harbored from the wind for whatever reason a lot more than other sections, right, that are wide open. And so you can tactically try to, make a game plan the night before to figure out, okay, the wind's going to be 20 miles an hour westerly wind at 20 miles an hour. So maybe I'll choose this canyon stretch that's isolated from the wind specifically to avoid it. The other two pieces to that, this is applies out here specifically, and I think it applies back home a little bit too, but traditionally speaking, the wind is much more prominent from like 10:30 to 7:30 out here, and maybe not so much back home, but that's when it hits. So if you go dawn patrol, you go first light, and you go last light, you can kind of avoid.
That's a good point.
The bulk of the wind, if you don't want to really get involved in it, you can get early morning or late. And we can talk about the tactical stuff later, but that's my pre-game stuff.
Pre-planning. Right? I like it. Even the day before, the evening before.
Yep.
Well, I told you, I knew it was going to be windy today, and I guided. And we walked into a canyon stretch, and canyon's an exaggeration of the word, but that's what they call it. Anyway, we went down because I knew that you'd have, high trees up on a hill breaking a lot of that wind. And it's not the kind of canyon where it funnels the wind down through there. There's a lot of breakup, and that's exactly why we chose it. So I had a little pre-planning, I guess, last night.
You didn't even realize it.
No, I mean, I kind of thought about it.
Yeah. And the best thing is, your river. This all goes back to learning, knowing your river in certain conditions. And so, not only do you have the benefit of horrible weather that scares people away and the parking lots are empty, but you know where to go to get the good fishing in, and it's like a double bonus.
It is. And you only learn those things usually the hard way. And I could tell you multiple places on one of our the biggest one that we fish a lot. There are places you do not want to go when it's windy because that wind does get funneled right down through that gap. And that's the worst. And I learned that the hard way. And I could tell you stories about being out there, in 20 degrees, and here comes a windy day. And sometimes I stuck it out. Sometimes I took a walk and went around the bend and changed everything.
You earned it.
Yeah, you got to earn it, like you say. But you learn the hard way.
Yeah. You talk about prep. The one thing that I can think about is if I know it's going to be windy, I'll take a rod that's weighted. Like, let's say I fish a 4-weight all the time.
Yeah.
I'll take a 5-weight just because it'll help me, push into that wind and cast a little bit more accurately.
Oh, for sure. I mean, a rod, no matter what I'm fishing, whether it's a dry fly and a fly line or a tight line, I'd much prefer a more powerful rod. I don't want to be stuck with a 2-weight on a windy day, no matter what style I'm fishing. That's for sure.
So let's talk about like some strategies. Like once you get on the river, one of the first things I do is if I do know it's going to be windier, like I'm going to fish a thicker leader system. So I'm going to fish like a 20-pound butt section because I know I'll have the power to kind of push through the wind.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Bill, real quick, are you referencing all different techniques, dry fly fishing, nymphing, streamer fishing with that? Or are you specifically,
question.
saying that you're going to do that?
I would say with nymphs and streamers. Most times, if it's windy, I'm going to fish streamers, nymphs with that thicker butt section. If I'm going to fish dry flies, I still might beef up my leader a little bit. I'm not going to fish like I'm probably going to start with like a 25-pound and then kind of taper down to 20, down to 15. And then, as it tapers down, maybe at the end, I might be ending at like 3X or 4X, at least around here. That's actually small probably for you, Matt, throwing those big chubbies.
Yeah.
Like, are you ending with like at that point, like 1 or 2X?
He's a chubby fan.
Just heavier tippet. It aids in it, right? It aids in punching through that line as opposed to finesse tippets. You're not going to throw a Griffith snat on 6X
it keeps
tip.
it from twisting.
Yeah, twist too. Good point.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So in general, I'll use a beefier leader. In heavy wind is one of the only times I'll come away from the George Harvey design for a dry fly leader because that's like 15-pound chameleon for a butt section. And I'll actually go to just, a standard extruded leader which has about a .022 butt section because it's going to punch. And I like that. So beefier leaders. Another thing I do a lot is just fish closer. I mean, that's a general principle for fishing in the wind. Don't fish 50 feet away. I mean, there's no good reason to do that. And, if you really, really, really want to get that piece of water that's all the way across the river, don't. Yeah. Because you probably can't reach it, if you're on a big river. Maybe yesterday you could, but with the wind today, don't do it. You got to be disciplined. You got to stay close.
For sure, yeah. It takes discipline to do that.
Yeah. For over a decade, Smith Creek has provided innovative, high-quality fly fishing accessories designed to put your gear in easy reach, free up your hands, and keep our waters clean. This November, Smith Creek is releasing 2 new products just in time for the holidays. Check their website to see the new tippet holder. Each unit is individually machined from high-quality billet aluminum and anodized in one of 2 eye-catching colors. They hold up to 5 tippet spools with a patented, spring-loaded plunger design that is easy to load and keeps your spools right where you need them. All Smith Creek products are built guide tough and backed by solid customer service. To learn more about Smith Creek products, visit their website at smithcreek.co. Precision Fly and Tackle is a family-owned business with a passion for the outdoors and a sense of adventure. They are anglers who enjoy every moment spent on the water with family and friends. Precision Fly and Tackle carries the widest selection of Euro rods, reels, lines, leaders, flies, and accessories. From the beginner to the advanced angler, Precision Fly and Tackle can outfit every angler, no matter the budget. Visit them online at precisionflyandtackle.com. Then use code Troutbitten10, that's the number 10, for 10% off your order. Gear up with Precision Fly and Tackle for your next adventure.
For me, it also, as I think about how I'm going to fish that day, it really does make a big difference to me to know exactly where that wind's coming from, and if it's just kind of like one strong predominant wind, because I'll change potentially what stream I fish and potentially the bank that I'm going to fish.
Yep.
I don't want to set myself up to be wading into the wind, casting into the wind all day if I don't have to. And if I can match that wind to a stream that I can fish with the wind heading downstream or with the wind at my back, or my approach to that stream is best from one bank, that's what I'll do. I have a lot of hunting apps not a lot. I have a couple hunting apps, and one of them is OnX, and you have a lot of wind data you can punch into that. So I can drop a pin anywhere in the state, and then I can add wind direction to that pin, and it will tell me exactly what that wind is. And then I can also even get like the 7-day forecast for wind there, just to kind of verify that that's the predominant wind there. But it can be really useful, especially on days. I mean, today was a good example in center, in this region where we had like 15 to 20 mile an hour winds with gusts into the 40s. I mean, that's pretty extreme. But when you have that kind of wind, you really can't set yourself up fishing into that all day long and expect to not get frustrated.
When I fish closer, the other thing that what just automatically happens is I have less line in the air. With less line, you have less sail.
Less problems.
Again, it doesn't, less problems. That's a general principle, right? It doesn't matter if I'm fishing dries or streamers or nymphs. I just try to have less line in the air, and so then the wind doesn't affect me nearly as much.
If it is windy, I try to keep the rod tip lower to the water because it helps some.
Yeah.
It's not going to solve it, but every little bit helps.
That's a good way to say it. I think none of these things that we'll talk about here coming up are going to solve it. That's a good point. It's not going to solve it. You're not going to go up.
All better.
The wind's still there. Right? You still deal with it. And like Trevor said in that first season of the Troutbitten podcast with the dealing with the elements, Trevor said the wind is the hardest thing to deal with. And I think he's right. And the more I've thought about it, I do think, because you're not going to solve it. You're not going to solve it.
No.
But another thing I do is just use weight. It's weight that is going to not defeat, but fight the wind. Weight is going to fight the wind.
It makes it harder for the wind to blow it because there's more weight.
Counteracts.
Whether it's your leader, whether it's your fly line, whether it's your rod, like you need more mass to compensate.
There you go.
There's some science stuff in there Doc can tell us about.
There is, but there's like a trade-off here, right? Because you're dealing with the main force that's disrupting your fly's drift is the wind into the surface area of your leader, right?
Sure.
And so if you build that leader up and you have now a beefy leader that's double the diameter that you were fishing before, you've also doubled the force on your fly from the wind.
That's an interesting
and so
thing.
you can counteract that by overweighting your system. And certainly I think that's the right answer. But there's also probably an argument for minimizing wind drift on your sighter itself and your leader. And so Dom's point, keeping less line out of your rod is big, not fishing as far away from yourself, because having 8 to 10 feet of line out of the tip of your rod is a big difference as opposed to 20 feet of line out of your rod.
It is.
Yeah, I don't know if there's like an argument for the slimmest leader you can produce and overweighting your system and sort of acknowledging that the wind is a time where lobbing is a thing to do, right? Is there a place for
never lob?
I said the L word.
The L word.
Is there a place for ugly casting in the wind just for the sake of minimizing your wind?
I've never.
That's another
drift.
thing. No,
Never.
you need speed. I'm sorry, I have to get in on that.
That's all right.
You
I'm
need
just posing
speed.
the question.
Right? No, I love it. You're like that. You're always like, I don't know, but you actually know. You have your strong
Setting up the
opinions
spike.
on that. He is. No, seriously. In wind, oh my, you really have to have good casting skills. And and good casting skills are built on good, crisp casting, speed in between 2 points. And that's what's going to give you turnover. You try lobbing in the wind, you're getting pushed back by that wind, or whatever the direction is of that wind. That's going to take your fly. Instead of you having the power, the wind overpowers you. So we talked about I say counteract the wind with more weight. And Bill, you brought up using a stiffer butt section. Well, along with stiffer goes thicker. And thicker is more weight. Once again, I mean, when you think about a leader, not too many of us think about how much a leader weighs. But that's the point. It does have mass. It pushes. And once again, you're using a thicker leader to counteract the wind, the resistance and everything. You're pushing through it with a heavier leader. That's really it. But then Trevor, you bring up a really cool point. Maybe we should go the other way and use a really thin leader so that the wind doesn't push on that leader as much. My answer to that is no. I'd rather go with thicker to have more power because, experience has taught me that works much better. If I go with really thin, even again, I said I don't use a Harvey leader in really heavy wind. I need power. I need punch.
I like it. And I think maybe I'm going to also pose a third scenario where the answer is somewhere between what we're talking about. Because I do think, so if you have, the tighter your loop.
Don't say lob.
No, I will not. The tighter your loop. So if you have a thicker leader and you have more mass and you can keep your loop tighter, the vertical height of your line in a cast is going to be less, right? So you compress that distance. That's
loop.
That's also
Tight
affecting how much the wind's affecting you, right? If you have if you're casting 20 feet of line and yet your vertical height of the cast is 2 feet, 3 feet, versus you're lobbing it, it's going all the way over your head and down in.
Big arcs.
That's a 20-foot vertical loop, right? So all of the wind is hitting that leader versus the wind, hitting a much smaller portion of it. However, once that line is in the water and you are now drifting, there's where I think there's, I don't know. Is there does the sighter matter, right? Or could you optimize a thinner sighter? And is there even a place for thinner tippet, for that distal section to have less tippet drag or less wind drag on your tippet? Or do you prefer to fight that by having a really steep angle off the water where you're basically keeping your rod closer to the water, right?
I think of it as a shallower angle, but
a shallower angle.
Understand.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Steeper. Yeah. No, it's a shallower angle for sure. So a shallower angle between your line and the water. And is that a better way to counteract the force?
Yeah, Bill's itching here. Go by.
Go for it.
So I ran into this scenario this fall when I was on a fishing trip the first day.
Yeah.
I got there and it was, low, clear, and I was expecting, hey, this is going to be tough fishing, and I prepped and had a 14-pound butt section on, and I was excited to fish, thinner because this is a river that has a lot of small bugs. And so the first day, 20, 30 mile an hour winds just ripping down the river. And the first like 3-4 runs, I just could not generate enough speed, even with a 4-weight, with that 14-pound. The wind was blowing directly downriver. And
you're on nymphs right now. I'm just clarifying. You're on a tight line nymph system. Yep.
Yeah. And so so at first I tried it with just nymphs. And then the next thing I was like, okay, well, let me put an indicator on here, because the indicator is going to give me more mass to kind of push it into the wind.
Right on.
And I went through the first 3 runs and I just felt defeated. And I was like, okay, let me step back and think about this.
Right.
And so the next run I switched up and I put the 30-pound OPST laser line on,
which is 0.016.
There you go.
Inches. Sorry, but it sounds heavier than it is. OPST is 0.016.
And that's the same as the 20-pound Maxima. Is that right?
Exactly. Very, very close.
And so like the next run, I was like, okay, now I felt confident that I could, like you're saying, I could generate the line speed. I could push it into the wind, and I could, I felt like I at least had a fighting chance.
Gotcha. I've been through that same thing. I've tried going super thin, if we're, again, on tight line nymphing systems, I've tried going, micro thin leader, like 6-pound leader. And you're thinking like, oh, okay, once it's on the water and I'm drifting, the wind won't hurt me as much. It hurts you. And you know what? I remember when I was a kid and I was fishing Berkeley trilene to my minnows, and it would get really windy. Seriously. I mean, that wind pushed my 4-pound Berkeley trilene around a good bit too. It hurts you. It pushes your micro leader, your 6-pound leader around almost just as much as your 20-pound. So the advantage of the weight and the mass and the punch, the push, the power of that thicker leader, absolutely, I think, is a bigger advantage than whatever minor, in my opinion, advantage you get from going micro thin with the leader. You're almost dead in the water with the micro thin stuff.
It's good stuff. What about one other thing, Dom, I was going to add?
Tell us,
tactic preference. Like if the wind's bad, do you default and go towards just streamer fishing? Just be like, if someone's walking to the stream and you get a 35-mile-an-hour wind and maybe they're feeling lazy that day, you just say, if you had to pick one of those dry fly nymphing, streamer fishing, what would you guys jump to make life easy?
Well, that's what I said in the intro, right? It's like some of the tactics that we might love are just out the window for me. Like I'm not going to be able to do that. Bill?
Throw meat.
Yeah, streamers.
Yeah.
I think it depends if I'm wade fishing or if I'm in a boat. If I'm wade fishing, my tactic would be to what Bill just said, to throw a heavy streamer, get in position where you're throwing with the wind and just cover a bunch of water. But if I'm in a boat, and I'm in a boat a lot, especially at the beginning of the season, and I'm dealing with a lot of wind out here, I can still throw a dry dropper. I might do dry dropper just because that extra weight allows me to punch through the wind. But because I can drift so long, it's a little bit more, maybe I like to dry dropper fish out of the boat when it's windy, because I'm not mending as much, and the boat's doing a lot of that work.
Once it's on the water, there you go. It's fishing.
Yeah.
Right? It's fishing all the way down. Like you say, the boat, the guy on the oars is doing the work.
Yep.
He's doing a lot of work.
For sure.
Yeah. That's a good point. So for me, the easiest way to beat heavy wind is a streamer. When I'm on a streamer, I don't care if I get some drag in the system. Drag is okay. I can work with that. I'm trying to move my streamer anyway.
Yeah.
I don't like trying to get really pure dead drifts on anything, whether it's a dry fly or a nib, when it's really, really windy. Maybe we should dig into that. I mean, right, let's go with dry flies. Let's go with dry flies real quick. What are your best tips for dealing with the wind with the dry flies? We brought that up a little bit. You can absolutely fish dry flies in some pretty heavy wind.
Because your fly, we talk about mass, and the fly line has all that mass, and the fly line's going to be your best. If you want to throw something at distance in wind, at some point the mono rig is going to collapse on you. Absolutely. Where like the fly line has more mass to kind of to punch it out there.
That's what it's built for.
Yeah, exactly. And so dry flies, like as we said before, like a thicker leader. I'm also doing a shorter leader because the shorter leader also gives you a better punch. Like if you're going out there and trying to throw a 12 to 14 foot leader in the wind, it's not going to go well. So like I'm probably looking at like 9, maybe 8.5 to 9 foot, depends on your size of the river.
Sure.
But I'm probably not going above 10 feet. I'm probably at 9.
Yeah, the shorter leader preserves the power that is inherent in that fly line, which is what it's there for, is to push things out there. I'm not going to use a 3-weight fly line and a 3-weight rod. I'm probably going 5 or even 6-weight. Matt, you're experienced with this, right? What's your choice in heavy wind?
As far as my leader formula goes?
Well, let's start with rod and, match to the fly line.
Yeah, I'm fishing my 9-foot 5-weight.
Sure.
Not even thinking twice about it. I still do a 9-foot. I have a 9-foot Harvey leader that I'm not going to call it a Harvey leader. I'll just call it a leader that I tie and shorten the butt sections, make it stiff. And then my tippet section might only be, let's say, 1X to 3X. Like let's go 18 inches of 1X, 12 inches of 3X. And then I fish suggestive patterns out here. I'm fortunate to do bigger attractor flies that already help, a size 10 stimulators more bulk than a 14 sulfur, right? And then many times I'm putting a small dropper off that strictly to help cast in the wind. Like, I like that. Honestly, that's why I put
a couple times.
Put a number 16 beadhead Rainbow Warrior on.
A little more weight.
Yep, a little more weight, and then I put only a foot of dropper on that bug, and I'm not really looking at trying to get down to the kill zone for nymphing. I'm just trying to put on more weight, and if I catch a fish eating emergers, so be it, right? And you'd be shocked how productive that is.
Well, you snag them a lot, don't you, Matt? Isn't that's your goal?
That's my goal. It's the belly hook.
They come and look at the dry, and then
belly
you
hook the whitefish.
Just rip the nymph into them.
Belly hook the whitefish.
Sloop taught him how to do that.
Slooper. Yeah,
but and then the other things, keep the flies in the water as long as you can. When I'm in a boat, right? It's you the less casting you do in the wind on a boat, and when you're drifting out here, the more productive you're going to be. And that might be the opposite if it's a non-windy day when you're really trying to plop these dry flies down in these boulder seams that are, I fish the Madison a lot. And if you're really fishing the Madison well, there's a boulder after a boulder after a boulder, and the currents change. And to effectively fish it, you're constantly picking up and casting and picking up and casting. But when it's windy, you're better off picking a line and trying to keep that stuff, in the water. The longer the flies are in the water, the better, if that makes sense. And you're sacrificing prime lies over longevity of the flies in the water.
I love that. That's sweet. Those are the calculations that we need to do in the wind. Bill, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, I was going to ask Matt. So I think you talked about terrestrials and so on. When it is windy, do you focus more on the bank?
Sure.
Because things are coming off. So like, are you looking, like when you're saying pick your seam, ideally you're throwing into a seam close to the bank and drifting it, 100 yards, 50 yards down a river and kind of.
Yeah, for sure. I think situational, right? Like we all have to accept that, like right now, if it's windy in Montana, I'm not really worried about the banks, right?
You're not fishing your
we're fishing slow water. So I would maybe tactically just go to a streamer and fish a slow hole and call it a day, right? Now, as
would you fish dries right now, Matt?
Not yet, but soon the midges. So the midges have been emerging. So the nymph bite's been good on midging, double nymph rig on with size 18 and 20 midges has been really good. Gotcha. Soon there'll be a prolific midge hatch, and the fish really do key in on those out here in the winter. So where you could fish a Griffiths gnat quite often. But back to what Bill was saying, in reality, you're saying, okay, let's take the situation and take a deep breath and evaluate it. Wind's blowing. It's the summer. You might have stoneflies, in the willows, adult stoneflies that are in the willows that are just hanging out waiting to mate. And all of a sudden the wind gusts come, and then the banks do come into play. The bugs aren't in the middle of the river hanging out on the rocks as much as they are. They're in the willows.
Go to the edges.
So
emerge.
that totally makes sense. So 100%, Bill, I'm going to change. And trust me, those fish are going to react to that too. You're going to see all these size 6 salmon flies plopping in the water. Every fish in the river is going to go towards the bank. And so I would change tactics from fishing mid-river to banks then. And I would also do it with the grasshoppers. When the wind picks up in the afternoon, hoppers are on the bank and fish know it.
Yeah.
And I'll change tactics from mid-river to bank fishing. It's all what's going on, right? Take a second to think, because instead of just doing the same old thing, because stuff changes throughout the day on a river.
I like it. Matt, will you please use the term farmer's cut again? I like that term.
What, the farmer's cut?
Farmer's cut.
I like that.
When did I say that? When the farmers cut the field?
Yeah, dude. You said you called
they-
it the farmer's cut. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that's cool.
You get there'll be
It's a
a
Western thing.
secret forum or a message board will go out. Farmer Johnny's cutting his crops down below.
You don't check
Big
for
timber.
flows and water
No,
levels.
he checks on the farmer's
you
cut.
check on
Right.
the brush hog.
Yes, people are giving them side cash to wait till August when when the hoppers are at their best.
Like, here, sir, why don't you cut
not
that
yet.
next week?
That's
Not
funny.
yet. Yeah. Nice. Anyway, that's some good dry fly tips, I think, right? In the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you at all think about aerodynamics of your fly, like the dry fly, when you're casting into the wind?
I mean, I do. I'm not going to use the biggest fly, but then again, you got Matt out there, and Matt's saying, maybe you're saying, Matt, that if you do want to use a air-resistant fly, then you're putting that nymph on the end to get that weight out there to help turn it over. Yeah.
And 100%. And I'm also choosing, like, if I'm choosing to fish dry flies, a bigger attractor pattern, right? It mimics a lot of bugs out here, but you guys get stone flies too. So, like, you could kind of disregard the mayflies that are hatching when it's super windy and put on a stimulator, and you might be surprised that you get maybe more action than you would on a sulfur dun that you can't see that gets blown off just because, I don't know, that those fish are seeing that stonefly that you're not seeing, that you don't, maybe it's not as abundant to the eye, but it's happening, right? Those stoneflies are out there. You guys get black stoneflies, brown stoneflies, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of stoneflies out there. And so maybe it's just because we're not seeing them in as heavy numbers, doesn't mean you shouldn't give it a shot.
I like it.
When it's windy, right? And you could put on a bigger dry fly to see what happens.
Right on.
Another thing, like when it comes down to casting, I'm going to try to make the least amount of false cast in any of the scenarios in the wind, because the more false cast I make, the better chance of whatever rig that I'm fishing is going to tangle up.
Yeah, like Matt said, for sure. In dry dropper, now you got 2 things on the line. And absolutely limit false casting. That's how I kind of am day to day, but that's even more important in the wind. Any of these elements that we try to battle, and especially this wind, they force you into doing things better. I think that's part of the fun of the challenge. That's why we stay out there when it is difficult, let's say, and perhaps uncomfortable. We stay out there because it forces us to learn the things that it takes to overcome that element. I think that's really neat. That's one of the coolest things about fishing, and that's why we're out there, and to walk away, whether we catch fish or not, we can say, I fished that well. I did it.
So how about streamers? You guys, the good stuff here. We're done with that elitist crap with the drives,
The dry
right?
fly elitism, with Matt and his Western elitism too.
Hey, man. I'm in my boat with my sandals, throwing those big dry flies.
Are those Chacos? Does he have Chaco sandals?
No, I have Obos.
What?
Obos sandals. Representing
Obos?
my Obos, man. Obos. It's a shoe brand. You should look it
Is
up.
it like
They're good.
Bozeman only? Is it?
Well, it's a Bozeman company.
There you go. Of course
There
it
you
is.
go. Of course it is.
Every
You
outdoor
could get 'em-
company
you
has to
could
be
get 'em back
stationed
there.
in Bozeman.
You could get them in State College. Is that Appalachian store
Appalachian
still?
Outdoors.
Yeah.
They still
They're
exist.
still here.
I'm
They're still here.
almost certain you could get a pair of Obos out there.
Let me ask Trevor. Trevor, do you know about Obos?
You know what's funny? I was in the app house
Here
today,
it comes.
but I did not see the sandal display featured today. It was all cold weather gear.
Wasn't drawing your attention in early December.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Anyway, how did we get on that? Bill wants to talk about streamers.
I want to talk about streamers, and we'll get off that.
Streamers in the
stuff.
wind. Does it matter? Does the wind hurt your streamer presentations?
Just chuck it.
Yeah, chuck it, baby.
Yeah, I think you work with it, right? I think it's kind of fun too to if I want to drift and like have more of a classic tight line looking drift. Streamers with that presentation, like I'll run a tandem of woolly buggers, pretty heavily weighted, or I'll I like to actually play around with letting the wind move my streamer, and I don't know, just kind of like it sort of is like a mental
work with it.
It's like a mental win because you're using that frustrating condition to your favor to just create a little movement, and you're okay with that movement. So
that's neat.
Yeah,
I'm with that. That's how you're working with the wind.
Yeah.
You know, you're using it really to your advantage. And again, depending on the angle. And you can, if you don't like the angle, go to the other side of the river. If you still don't like that, maybe go around the bend. If it bends to the, if you get a right angle bend in the river, you can totally change things on that wind direction. Yeah. You can work with it, get the effect that you want. I like that.
Mm-hmm. I think of any of the tactics, I think the wind affects streamers the least, because streamers are, for the most part, any of the streamers that I'm going to fish are going to be heavier, and you're either, the mono rig is either weighted very heavy with that streamer most cases, or if you're fishing a sink tip,
sinking line,
that sink tip is so heavy and it's under the water, and so there's no wind effect to that at all.
Right. Once again, we get back to the idea that weight in some form or another defeats the wind.
Sure.
Yeah. Battles it at least, right?
And you guys know me. I don't fish streamers much. I fish streamers the least amount of everybody here, but like I allow the Mother Nature to dictate sometimes when I fish streamers. And that's when I start fishing streamers, because to your point, Bill, especially in a boat, you submerge the rod tip, on the side of the boat and start stripping.
No effect.
There's no effect. So it's like, okay, so maybe it's not the best numbers tactic if conditions were perfect that day, but because conditions are gone south, maybe my best chance to actually catch fish that day is throwing those streamers and just committing to it. And so I allow that to happen a lot when I'm fishing out of a boat out here.
On the windiest days, I know I always have that available. I can fish streamers, and it is really not going to hurt me. The wind, is really not going to hurt me. I can get through it. It's okay with a streamer.
And I think you said this earlier, like the wind, at least in our area, a lot of times wind is bringing in a front, or sometimes it will be post front, but like a lot of times that wind is accompanied by clouds. And so it does lean to like streamer conditions a lot of times.
Yeah, right on.
And out here, it's the opposite.
Is that right? You get a lot of clear days with wind.
It's sunny, once June 15th hits, it's sunny every day until October 1st. I'm not kidding. Like at the beginning, Dom, you mentioned you'd take a windy, cloudy day over a sunny day. And out here, you don't get an option. Like
you get both.
It's windy and sunny, but the difference being, and I've said this numerous times, I think having rainbow trout
species, I knew you were going to say that,
in the system is an advantage, because I think the brown trout, when it's sunny and the sun's high, they're go done. To cover, man. They're done. Like they're hard to catch. And we have the advantage of rainbows that, they're not seeking that cover as much as the brown trout are. So they're more aggressive in the riffles when it's sunny. And so what happens there though, is like I said, you guys could have a sunny day out there where the fishing's really poor, where I might have a banner day because I caught 80, out of 80 trout, I catch 65 rainbows.
Whoa!
I'm Frank nailing it.
He's throwing the 80 number out there.
No, you get it. 20 fish, 30 fish.
Right, 10.
80% of those are rainbows.
I got you.
When we were in Montana,
it's just different.
When we were in Montana, sleeping on your couch, we got, in like 2.5 weeks, we got one cloudy day, and it was freaking phenomenal for brown trout.
Yep.
You saw the difference
first. And I was like, but like we caught fish, like to Matt's point, like through the sun and whatever. But we got that one cloudy day, and I was like, oh man, this is good shit.
Yeah.
So with these streamer tactics, again, like I say, for me, I don't care. about the wind. I hardly care. And I'll use the wind a little bit to my advantage. Like you're saying, Trevor, I guess I do care somewhat. If I'm trying to actually use the wind to move the line, move the leader, okay. But let me back up to dry flies. And let me point out, I think you guys would agree with this. I would rather, as far as wind direction, I would rather have the wind in front of me. I'd rather punch into the wind. Let's say that I'm trying to get a dead drift and I'm fishing upstream. And I'd rather punch into the wind because then I can get that wind to actually push a little bit of slack back to me. And what is slack? It ends up when it hits the water as S-curves. And that to me is a good thing. I can work with that. If it's behind me, it wants to just straighten my leader out. I don't like that, So if I had to choose, and often we can, again, by walking around the bend or choosing what side of the river you're fishing. But as we move into nymphing techniques, I want it the opposite.
Yes.
And let's say we're nymphing, and we're going to talk about indies in a second, indicator nymphing in a second. But if I want to continue tight line nymphing, let's say the wind is not too bad. I can still tight line nymph by overweighting the system, okay? And then especially if I have the wind behind me, I don't care much. And Bill, you talked about this in that first podcast when we went for about 10 minutes. We talked about wind and being a difficult element. Bill, you brought this up. You can kind of, with the wind behind you, and again, we're casting upstream so we can get dead drifts. You can pull into the wind then because it's behind you. You can bring that sighter and your rod tip into the wind, and you can defeat that drag that's trying to happen. You could pull into it.
Yeah.
But boy, if it's in front of you, how I like it with dry flies, that's bad. It's just pushing drag into your system, and there is no way to defeat it on a pure tight line system.
Yeah. I will say with nymphing, though, the first thing I try to do is an indicator, because that indicator creates kind of, when it sits on the surface, it has that surface tension to kind of hold it a little bit. And so that might be a case where I'm not trying to use the thinnest or the lightest indicator I have. I might keep a couple of the
heavier bobbers
and putting them out there because they're going to be less affected by the wind.
Agreed. There you go. You're using weight again.
Yep.
It keeps coming back to that.
Yep.
Nobody really seems to talk about the weight of an indicator. They talk about so many other elements of an indicator. I love a Dorsey yarn indicator. The yarn weighs literally nothing. Well, the yarn weighs almost nothing, and that tiny little rubber band weighs almost nothing. The Dorsey's great. It's so sensitive, but not in the wind. It's not your best tool. And I use a thingamabobber. I mean, they weigh 50 centigrams. 55 centigrams is what the medium thingamabobber weighs. That's like a number 12 stonefly, with a 3.5 millimeter bead, maybe. And that matters. There you go. You're using that weight to punch you through the wind. The airlocks weigh even more. Those, what do they call it? The Obos. They weigh even more than that. And all of those, you can use that weight to your advantage. It's a bobber. That's what it is at that point. Any solid indicator is going to help you punch through that wind. You use it as a tool. You use it to that effect. That's one of the reasons why we can stay out there, fight through that wind, and nymph rather than walking back to the car and giving up.
Well, not only that, Dom, but it's probably safe to say it's more effective at catching fish in that situation, right? Not only is it better to fish because of the wind and the problems wind gives us fishing and trying to keep contact, but it's just downright the better method, I think, when it's that windy. If I'm going to try to catch numbers, I'm going to an Indy for all those good reasons you just mentioned, and the fact that it's probably going to give me the best chance at landing fish that day.
Yeah. Well, like Bill said, I mean, that's my first thing to do when it gets, more than moderately windy. Yeah, I'm throwing the Indy because I throw an Indy a lot of times anyway. And I'll go tight line to the Indy. We've talked about that. We did a full podcast on tight line to the indicator method. Yes, you can combine the two methods. We do it all the time. But you could throw a 9-foot leader or whatever, a shorter leader and a fly line and do some mending and all that. That'll work too. By using the indicator to anchor, like Bill said, your drift to the surface with the Indy, you're very much defeating or at least battling that wind.
One thing, if it does get windy, a lot of times I'm going to try to fish in one current and one current seam.
Yeah.
And most times I'm going to wade to position, if I can, to fish directly above because I feel like, because if you think about it, if you cast at a 45 out in front of you and you hold the line off the water at that point, that line off the water has a better chance it is going to be caught by the wind and blow it upstream or downstream.
Whatever direction. Yeah.
Versus if you wade yourself into one seam and you cast the indicator directly above you, you can lay the line on the water at that point and it won't have as much effect on it because everything is in one seam and coming back to you.
I love that. And there you are again with getting close. That's one of the general principles of fishing in the wind. Just get as close as you can. Stop trying to cast. Don't be a hero. That's what you say. Right, Bill?
Yeah, don't be a hero.
Don't be a hero. Get closer.
Yeah.
I will use heavier nymphs or heavier split shot, or I'll often drop shot in the wind. I do that a lot. We did it today. I used a 1/24th ounce drop shot. That's about 95 centigrams. And once again, that's probably about a size 10 or even a size 8 stonefly or whatever, 4 to 4.5 millimeter bead, tungsten bead. And with that kind of weight, especially in a drop shot, well, I'll drop shot when I want to bottom bounce. And I want to use that bottom and that contact with the bottom to once again kind of fight the wind. The wind's trying to push my leader around, but that bottom contact is trying to keep it stabilized. And that cooperation between the two things is what I'm looking for, that equalization in a way.
Now, do you drop shot with the indicator?
I don't. And my friend and I were talking about that today because that's the way he has used drop shot. And I get it. That's the Provo bounce rig. And you call it whatever you like. But I don't. When I throw drop shot, I'm sure we'll do a full podcast someday on drop shot. But when I throw drop shot, I'm trying to really almost paint the bottom with that little ball down there, or split shot, whatever you're using. And it's a bottom contact. It's a very controlled, hopefully, drift for me. And I'm not trying to just scrape and drag. I'm trying to just tick a few times on the way down through, 5, 6, 8 times on the way down through. And I feel like it's a control system for me. And it's not enough for me to just touch. I want it to look natural. And that then is up to me because I have that control. When I throw the indie there, Bill, when I throw the indie in between me and that drop shot, I'm out of control. When I throw an indie rig, I surrender to the fact that as soon as that indie is on the water, it's doing the job of leading the flies down one seam. And I'm trying to keep the tension off the indie, whether that's mending line or that's keeping all the line off the water, tight line advantage to the indie. But again, the indie then is in control. And it's okay. It works. You can line it up there and go bounce, bounce, tick to tick. It's all right. But that's not my preference anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the nymphing stuff. Like anything else, though, think about this. Sometimes the wind actually helps us more than it hurts us, actually. Sometimes it is an advantage. We've talked about a few of those things, using that to our advantage in some of these presentations. Anything else with that? You guys have anything? Any little tricks up your sleeve?
I think in the summer, I don't know, like I'm just thinking fly selections. In the summer, if it's windy, I'm going to, probably start with an ant, whether it be a wet ant, whether it be a dry ant, or maybe my next is a beetle. And then after that, probably like a green weenie, because those are things when it gets windy in the summer and even into the fall, those terrestrials, at least in our area, that's what comes off of the trees. And so Matt's talking about like hoppers and stuff out west, but like in our area, those are the main ones that I can think of.
I remember Trevor talking about the ants coming off of the sycamore leaves.
Yeah, it was last fall. I think it was. It was almost a year ago. It was a little more than a year ago. Yeah, I had a day that was kind of cool. So it was a sycamore tree dropping leaves, and the fish were really keyed in on those leaves hitting the water, and there did seem to be. Ants are what caught the fish that were rising to those leaves. Yeah. So.
Oh yeah, I'll piggyback on that. In an isolated wind event, not so much I think we've been talking about sustained wind throughout the day, but when you get a thunderstorm, an isolated thunderstorm, especially back home, and even out here, and the wind is just ferocious and knocks all kinds of stuff in the water. How many times after it blows through is the fishing like lights out for 10, 15 minutes? And I always attribute that to, you play it to your advantage. You let that storm, if you can weather that storm on the bank and that wind, and then you get back in the river, there's always like a 15-minute, I call it the magic window of some seriously good fishing. Do you guys experience that?
Oh yeah, a few times.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. It's not predictable necessarily, but when you hit it, you go, "Oh, that's kind of why."
It's like it's like somebody throws a switch, and it's like every fish in the river just starts to feed. And I've hit it. I hit it once this year, like where you had that, like when that storm blew in, it got windy and it was just miserable. But yeah, it just flipped the switch and fishing went from garbage to amazing.
Stay out there. Good things sometimes happen.
Yeah. The other thing I'll mention with the wind and an advantage is solitude. I mean, I think to Dom, you've mentioned it. I mean, I think a lot of fair weather guys tend to they don't want to deal with that, and so you can find some good solitude on your local rivers when the forecast is calling for wind. And any day that you get the river to yourself is an advantage, I think.
It is. Yeah, I don't know too many anglers that leave the house saying, you know what, I hope I run into a half dozen guys today.
Right.
Man, I hope someone's in my spot today.
Man, I hope I get to be second to hit that water.
Sure.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right, there it is. Our strategies for fly fishing in windy conditions. Wind does not need to keep you home, and it doesn't need to force you off the water. There are many ways, not just to deal with the difficulty of wind, but to learn something from the challenge, and sometimes even catch more trout than you would have in calm conditions. Many of the elements of foul weather that bother us just don't seem to affect the trout very much. And if you learn to beat the wind and weather, or at least work with it and cut that edge a bit, both success and solitude can be yours. Forget the forecast. Just fish. All right, we have 2 more episodes here in Season 5 of the Troutbitten podcast. Just 2 more episodes before the holiday. Then we'll take a couple weeks off before returning to the Skills Series format for Season 6, with less conversation and more direct, tightly focused topics that cover one aspect of fly fishing for trout. I'm not sure what that Skills Series will be, but I think I have an idea. So look for all of that in your Troutbitten podcast feed. Trevor Smith, Bill Dell, and Matt Groe, thank you for your ideas and your conversation tonight. Thank you to everyone out there listening, and thank you to our show sponsors. Trevor, will you read us out?
I'm on it. Remember, the Troutbitten Project is a free resource for all anglers. The Troutbitten website hosts over 900 articles with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and tags, too. Be sure to find the Troutbitten YouTube channel, currently featuring the Troutbitten Tips series in collaboration with Wilds Media. These are short, useful, and unique tips for your fly fishing life. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment, because it really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.
Fish. Hey now.
80 fish.
Little bitch.
Sloop can catch 80, anybody can.
Oh, that's cold.